أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي قصرت عن رؤيته أبصار الناظرين، وعجزت عن نعته أوهام الواصفين. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما آتاكم الرسول فخذوه وما نهاكم عنه فانتحوا واتقوا الله إن الله شديد العقاب. صدق الله العلي العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Before I begin the night's discussion and walk you into what we will be discussing, just a quick recap, or actually a correction from last night's discussion that we had. Some of the brothers were gracious enough to approach me and correct something which I had made a reference to, and I would like to go ahead and correct that as well. Many of you might not have realized it, but alhamdulillah, some people in the crowd had the honesty that they were listening to it and they were able to approach me, that the discussion or the story that I had narrated in reference to Mullah Sadra and Abu Rahan Baruni. Abu Rahan Baruni lived in the 5th century, and Mullah Sadra was in the 9th or 10th century. So they couldn't have been together in that story which I mentioned. In fact, it was Bualisina who was with Mullah Sadra in that story that I had mentioned in front of you. So I just wanted to correct that as far as reference is concerned. Story was correct. The individuals regarding and being in the story were incorrect. So hopefully we can rectify that. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The verse that I recited is from chapter number 59, Surah Hashr, verse number 7. It's a verse which clarifies many things when it comes to our Islamic fiqh. It's a verse which is used to prove many things that we believe in and many things that we do not believe in. It's a verse which is a distinguished point between some of the practices that Shia madhab has still kept intact and those of the followers of brothers in faith, they have neglected them. It's a verse that is a discerning point when it comes to working out and choosing right from wrong as far as their fiqh is concerned. So from that aspect, you look at how important this verse would be. In fact, all the verses of Quran are a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This book, we've been talking about it from the very first night, is a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But every single verse requires us to look in depth and details to understand the background and understand the context of revelation. This verse, which I recited, and I'll translate, it says, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. It says, whatever Prophet has brought for you, hold on to it. Contain it, retain it, keep it with you. And whatever Prophet has made it forbidden for you, وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Stay away from it and do not lean towards it. اتقوا الله, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Allah shadidul iqab. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His adab and His compensation is indeed very, very severe. So you can understand the tone of this ayat is very clear. And we use this ayat to prove many practices that we still have in madhab al-tashayyuh. In fact, the thing is that all of these things did exist from prior to the time of Rasulullah. In fact, in the time of Rasulullah, and later on after the wafat of Rasulullah, some of these practices were abolished and was abandoned, in other words, or made abandoned or forcefully forgotten, so that these practices would not be misused. And this is at least the reason that is given by brothers in faith. But we look at that as to how it is possible for one to go ahead and change. And thus, it raises a point that why do we call ourselves to be Shia? Why don't we just call ourselves to be Muslim? When in fact, when there's Islam that was sent down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ayat of Quran says, Inna dina inda Allahil Islam. It doesn't say Inna dina inda Allahil Shia. Or it says, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. That it is the Islam which is to be followed, that anything else, if it's followed other than Islam, it will not be accepted from that person. فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. That person, according to the ayat of Quran, is amongst the losers and khasirin. So all of these ayat are referring towards the word Islam. Then why do we use this word Shia? If you look at the origination of this word, exists in the ayat of Quran. You find on numerous occasions that the word is used Shia for, Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, that he was the Shia of Nuh. So here we understand the word Shia means someone who's a follower. We talked about it the other night, so I won't go too much in the details of it. The word Shia has appeared in Quran. So that Shia obviously is not reflecting towards us. It's not referring towards the madhab Shia. We should not start proving the fact that because the word Shia is in Quran, Shias are on haqq, and the word Sunni or Wahhabi or Barelvi or whatever it is, the other sects of Islam, Sufi or whatever, is not exist in Quran, so therefore they are not on haqq for that. No, they're not on haqq for other reasons, not for this particular reason. Because we believe that what we have received is from Prophet, and what we have received is from Masumin, and it's in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to follow. That's the solid reason behind it, not the reason of using these ayat to prove the haqqaniyat of madhab tashayyuh. That should not be the case. But nonetheless, the word Shia exists on Quran on numerous occasions. It has been used. We see that there's another word which is referred to our madhab. It is called madhab Jafari. You ever wondered why are we giving nisbah to our sixth Imam, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam? There must be a reason that we are called Ja'fari madhab. We're not called Alawi madhab. I mean, at least it's not Ra'ij. We are Alawi madhab. It's not called Hassani madhab. It's not called Husseini. It's not called, for example, Radavi. It's not called, Masalan, for example, Qadhami or other names of Masumi that usually you find attached with the names of Sadat Ikram. We found it to be Madhab Ja'fari. What was the reason behind naming it after our sixth Imam? It's very simple. Because Imam had the opportunity to explain this religion in a way that no one else before him had the opportunity to do so. Other Imams were always occupied with other things, such as wars and whatnot, that they did not have the opportunity. Fifth Imam laid this foundation, and sixth Imam had this opportunity. But there was another incident why it's called Madhab Ja'fari, as opposed to Madhab, for example, others. The reason is because Imam lives in a very, tactical time, if you want to call it. Imam's wiladat is in the year 83 after Hijrah, sixth Imam that is. 80 after Hijrah is the wiladat of Imam A'zam, Imam Abu Hanifa. 93 after Hijrah is the wiladat of Imam Malik ibn Anas. Obviously, Ahl Sunnah have 4 Imams Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. These are the four Imams whom they consider to be mujtahid, and they follow the fiqh of one of these four Imams. You go somewhere, you'll say, if you were to inquire, people say we are Hanafi madhab. One part of the world, they'll say we are Maliki madhab, for example. We are Hanafi, for example. We are Shafi'i, for example. Sixth Imam that is, lived in the midst of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik ibn Anas. And if you look at that era that Imam is living in, we find that there are two makatib fikr. There are two, schools of thought that are coming up. One school of thought is coming up in Madinatul Munawwara under Imam Malik. Second school of thought is seen coming up in Iraq, in Baghdad, where Imam Abu Hanifa is buried. Those who were the followers of Imam Abu Hanifa, they relied heavily on their opinions, their rai, and using aql. Those who were the followers of Imam Malik, they relied heavily on hadith. Thus you have the akhbari, or whatever it is that you want to call, hadithi, or those who are the followers of hadith, Ahl Hadith, for example. These are different terminologies that came about later on, but this is the origin of it. What do I mean? What is the difference between the two? Difference is that when you're living in Medina, you have very limited masail. Predominantly, it's a Muslim society. Prophet lived there, and other great companions of the Prophet lived there. Which by that I mean those who were well versed in the fiqh of the madhab. And those are the ones who narrated the ahadith of Prophet properly. So imagine, and I'll give you examples so that you and I can relate to this. Imagine if you grew up in the city of Najaf. Imagine if you grew up in the city of Qom, for example. And even in your own places where you have come from, where deen was something which was dominating. And so when you were living back home, your masail were, simplistic. They weren't too out of bound. They were things, but they were solved through the hadith. And that was the case with Imam Malik and his followers. They had very limited issues, and those issues were pretty much followed and solved through the hadith of Prophet and those narrations that were received. As opposed to in Baghdad, where there were many different nations that were living there. There were many different groups of people that existed there. Many people migrated from different nations and came and started living in Baghdad and Iraq. Definitely there were more complex issues. Once again, the example would be perfect over here. For example, a person like me who grew up, let's say, in Pakistan, someone like you, for example, grew up in India or in Iran or Iraq. You lived over there, your masail and your issues were there, but they were pretty much solved. You didn't have to worry about too many things over there because it's an Islamic society. For example, you wouldn't have to worry about the halal and haram of the source of the meat because you would know that everybody is a Muslim, and when they're selling, you don't have to question a Muslim whether it's halal or it's not. You don't have to question about many of the products that you used at that time, whether they were halal or not. It was something which was understood because you're living in a Muslim society. When you made a migration to this country, right away the issues became complex. Now you had to question whether I'm buying this, it's halal, whether it's not halal, whether this is permissible or not permissible. And thus you find a chapter in the books of fiqh known as At-Ta'arrub Ba'd al-Hijrah. That means that which literally means that if you fear that you will not be able to follow your religion after migration, then it becomes haram for you to stay at that place. I think people are crowding up in the back, so if I can just request you to get up and move a little bit forward so that we can give some breathing room in the back with a loud salawat. يالي. So you would see, you could relate to this example that how your questions and your masail and your issues are more complex when you're living in this part of the world. And because the case is, it's not a Muslim society. And that was the case at that time as well. Therefore, when that was the case, they relied heavily on their aql and using their rai, using their opinion to go ahead and solve many things because they did not have hadith to back it up. And that is why we have this in our religion. One of the main sources of the religion to derive the laws is what? Quran. Second source alongside with this is what? Is the sunnah of Rasulullah and Ma'asumeen and their ahadith that we have received. Third is your aql, intellect. Fourth is the consensus of ulama. These are the four sources that you go ahead and use to derive. But Quran and Sunnah are the most important ones. As long as something is solved through Quran and Sunnah, then you go to the third or the fourth one. But when you look at it, in Baghdad, that was the case. So these were the two schools of thoughts which were being raised and which were coming about. At this point, one was in the opposition of the other one, and that was the reason our sixth Imam had to take this stand. This sixth Imam had to revive the teachings in a way that he would bring the true teachings of Islam, which was given to him from his forefathers leading up to Rasulullah. And thus when Imam emerged like this, the fiqh that Imam introduced was referred to as fiqh Ja'fari. Makes sense. In opposition to fiqh Hanafi and fiqh Maliki, you had fiqh Ja'fari. That was the reason we call ourselves to be madhab Ja'fari, for example. But that does not mean we're denying that we're now followers of the madhab of other Imams. No, we have a very famous hadith in this regards, because there isn't any difference between what our Imams have narrated. Whatever our first Imam said is same what our sixth Imam said. Whatever our sixth Imam said is same as what our 11th Imam said. So the hadith says, Awwaluna Muhammad, Awsatuna Muhammad, wa akhiruna Muhammad, wa kulluna Muhammad. But if you look at it actually, Awwal is our Prophet Muhammad. Middle one is Muhammad al-Baqir. Last one is Muhammad al-Mahdi ajallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif. Literally speaking, that is the case. But that's not what is being referred to. That they're not by name all Muhammad, rather by their actions they're all Muhammad, because their actions are one and only. Their actions are similar to one another. They're in sync, complete sync. They're not going against one another. And that is the reason we understand why fiqh Ja'fari emerged, and Imam Ja'far Sadiq had to use that to go ahead and enable and to revive the teachings that were from Rasulullah. So here we understand one source is Quran, the second source is Sunnah of Rasulullah. But the difference between the two is that Quran is qat'iyyu sanad wa dhanniyyu dalil. What does that mean? That means Quran is, the authenticity of Quran is undoubted. There's no doubt about that. It's kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's dhanniyyu dalil. When you want to go ahead and present as a dalil for something that this is what it's referring to, that might not be the case all the time. You might not be able to prove something clearly from Quran, whereas as opposed to hadith is what is dhanniyu sanad wa qati'u dalil, the opposite of it, that it might not be authentic all the time where this hadith is emerging from, but when it comes to proving something, it is clear cut. We've mentioned before, the Quran is a book 600 pages long, right? So you don't expect things in tafsil, in details in it. These are just ijmal. The Quran gives general laws, and then obviously hadith goes ahead and explains it. This is where we realize the value of our scholars. For example, if I was to throw a name in front of you, Hassan ibn Yusuf ibn Mutahhar. I don't know how many of you know whom I'm talking about. But I'll give you his title, then you'll know who it is. Hassan ibn Yusuf ibn Mutahhar is who? Allama Hilli. There you go. Some of you knew it. Allama Hilli is Hassan ibn Yusuf ibn Mutahhar. So it's not important that we know his name properly, where he was born, where he did, where he lived, and so on and so forth. No, that's not important. What's important is what Allama Hilli left for us. What Allama Hilli, the work that he had done for us, that is more important. What he did, his lifestyle and all that stuff, obviously, Lifestyle would be good for us to follow, but other things are really irrelevant. So I don't expect all of you to know his shajara and nasab, his name and his father's name and his grandfather's name. That is something which is not being asked. But nonetheless, we should know these prominent figures when their names are pronounced. So Hassan ibn Yusuf ibn Mutahhar is Allama Hilli. One of the events that is mentioned in regards to Allama Hilli is the event of Sultan Khudabande. That this sultan, he had done a terrible thing, and that was that he divorced his wife 3 times in one sitting. And according to madhab ghayr, amme, for example, Ahl Sunnah, if you divorce in one sitting 3 times, you become haram, abadi, forever. Then you can remarry this person. And then there's a process that you have to go through in order to, but that is difficult. In other words, you're done. So, and this proves that the sultan, after doing this, it probably was done out of anger that he uttered these words. So he felt ashamed and he felt regretting. He contacted the ulama. And all of the ulama said to him what? They said, well, that's it, you're done. You gotta leave her. She's haram, talaq. It's divorce, 3 divorces. Talaq-e-ba'in is what we refer to. So we have kinds of talaq in our fiqh. One is talaq-e-raj'i, where the husband gives the talaq and there's a time period for ruju. The period of iddah is the period of ruju, where if they were to wanted to get back together, they can without even doing nikah again. So for example, a husband divorces his wife, in that 3-month period of iddah, waiting period, if they decide to go back, they can go back without any, obstacle. But he divorced her, and he said, talaq, talaq, talaq. And according to their fiqh, 3 talaq, you're done. He contacted all of these fuqaha. Is there any way? He said, no. Unfortunately, although you're sultan, but still nothing can happen. His wazir said, no, there is one fiqh. And his alim, I can call him. You might want to do ruju to him. He said, bring him. He was looking for any way out of it. Thus Allama Hilli was brought. Allama Hilli told him that this talaq, if anything, it's just one talaq. But that too is impossible. Why? Because you need 2 dhawa' adlin, as the ayat of Quran says. In order to divorce, you need dhawa' adlin, 2 adil witnesses for this talaq to take place. Without these 2 adil witnesses, talaq doesn't take place. Secondly, if you gave talaq out of anger, that talaq is batil in our fiqh as well. So 3 talaq can never happen in one sitting. In order for 3 talaq to take place, you have to give talaq, waiting period must end, you remarry, give talaq, waiting period must end, you remarry, give talaq, you made it a game, you made it a fun out of it. Allah says punishment is you're haram on each other forever. That's how 3 talaqs take place, not in one sitting. So he was excited. He said, what do I have to do? He said, nothing. This talaq, as if it never happened. You're still husband and wife. So he said, okay. So he believed, and obviously that's what he was looking for. But he wanted others to find out about this madhab as well. So he organized a gathering. Let it be known. At that time, the prevalent madhab is Ahl Sunnah, and that too, the followers of Imam Abu Hanifa, and the followers of other Imams as well. Allama Hilli walks into this gathering where Sultan is there and the people of all the 4 madhahib are sitting there. And when he walks out of that gathering, everyone in that gathering had converted to madhab tashayyu. And no, he wasn't carrying Asai Musa with him. He wasn't carrying any magic wand with him, right? He didn't have that. It was purely his immense knowledge about the religion. We had people and if someone needs to know what he did, I'll mention it later on. We had people, for example, Shahid Awwal, Shahid Thani, Shahid Thalith. Shahid Thalith, Nurullah Shusturi, who's buried in Agra, I believe, in India, he's considered to be Shahid Thalith, because these are the ulama who were killed in line of, propagation. Because of their ilm, they were killed. Shahid Awwal, for example, about him is mentioned, his book that he has written known as Lum'a ad-Dimashqiyya. It's a book, a fundamental book. But you know how he wrote it? Some scholars mention that he was in prison. He did not even have ink, so he wrote that book with his own blood. That's the effect of that book, that even until today, any of these maraja that we have, all of them had read this book before they became maraja. That's the effect of it. So he wrote it, obviously, you don't consider it to be a very lengthy book, because if he's writing it with his blood, it's got to be very difficult. Only 300, 200 years later, comes another man by the name, known as Shahid Thani, who does what? Who does the commentary of Lum'atu Dimashqiyya in 10 volumes to explain to people what Shahid Awwal meant, so that people will understand, to decrypt, if that's the correct word, what he had written in those code words. And he was also killed in this way as well, in the time of, I believe, Sultan Suleiman of the Ottoman Empire. The Qadi of the time had said something in regards to Shahid Thani, and that resulted in the killing, false killing of through the hands of Sultan, I believe. But Sultan Suleiman, now that his tazkirah has come, is a very prominent figure in the Ottoman Empire as well. And this is where you understand that people had inclination toward Ahlul Bayt. But it was people in their surrounding who always refrained them from doing that. And one of the events that is mentioned in regards to Sultan Suleiman, that he was going through Iraq. Obviously, in his time, he conquered many lands, and which became part of the Muslim Ummah or Muslim community. Obviously, we don't condone many of such attacks, how he acquired it, but nonetheless, he expanded the Muslim Ummah and whatnot. So one day he stumbled and he was passing through the city of Najaf. When he was passing through the city of Najaf, he said, let's go do the ziyarah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali. His Qadi, who was alongside with him, he said, you are Sultan of seven oceans, or whatever they used to call it at that time. Sab'a Aqalim, right? It's not according to your shan to come down and go do ziyarat of another sultan of his time. Obviously, their mindset is that he's the Khalifa of the Waqt, and that person was the Khalifa of his time. So it's not according to your shan and respect to go ahead and do this. He wanted to go for the ziyarah. He had that love which was pulling him. So he said, let's do istikhara, tafa'ul bil Quran. Now, the istikhara that we have in our culture, a lot of time it's misused. And I'll go out into tangents, I'll stay to the story. So he said, let's do istikhara. Istikhara with Quran. And I said, fine. They open up the ayat. You know how it's done in istikhara with Quran is that you recite the durood, and you recite salawat, and you recite 3 times Qul Huwallah, you recite a dua, in Allahumma inni tafa'altu bi kitabika wa tawakkaltu alayka fa'arini min kitabika ma huwa maktum min sirrika wa maktum. And then you recite the salawat 3 times, and then you open up the Quran. Whatever the ayat comes on the right side, the first ayat, you take that to be the result of your istikhara, positive or negative. When they did the istikhara to go do the ziyarat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the ayat that came was, Ya Musa, fakhla na'alayk innaka biwadin muqaddas tuwa. The ayat said, O Musa, remove your shoes. You are indeed in a very holy, valley. He turned to his Qadi, he said, you told me not to go. Allah is telling me, remove the shoes and then rush toward it. So he removes the shoes. So these Salatin had good intentions to do good things, but these were the qudat that they had in their surrounding which refrained them from performing such acts. You know, in regards to Nadir Shah, it's also mentioned that when he was asked, they build a masjid, he said, what do you want to be written on the masjid? He said, Yadullah fawqa aydihim. Write this ayat, Yadullah fawqa aydihim. He said, his wazir said, Wallahi, this is ilham, inspiration to Nadir Shah. Because Nadir Shah is illiterate. He does not know Quran at all. This ayat must be an inspiration that is given to him for something that he had done. But nonetheless, Sultan goes and performs the ziyarah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and then later on, he builds a fire, and in that fire, he throws his qadi, and that was the end of him. We were going back to the story that we had, that Shaheed al-Thalith, I'm just explaining Allama Hilli, what he was able to do, that he was able to convert the whole crowd, which was the follower of another fiqh. But when he walked out of that jalasa, the people were the followers of fiqh tashayyu. That was his immense knowledge. I'll get back to what he did. You might be wondering, some of you might have heard the story before. But Shaheed al-Thalith, Allama Shustari, Nurullah Shustari, in regards to him, when he was qadi of the time in Lahore, you know, obviously it's the hukumat belongs to, again, Ahl Sunnah. But how did he become the qadi? He said, I will give fatwa according to all the madahib. And that was true. Whenever he gave fatwa or did some sort of decree, he would give according to the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa, fiqh of Imam Malik, fiqh of Imam Shafi'i, fiqh of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Never through fiqh imamiyah, but always through fiqh imamiyah. Because there are things which are similar in those four fiqh with us. So every time he would give, he said, I reference Imam Shafi'i said this, which would be same what it is in fiqh imamiyah, in fiqh Jafari. Sometimes he would get fatwa according to Imam Abu Hanifa, which would be similar to what we have in our fiqh. But in order to do that, just imagine your knowledge of all the fiqh that exists at that time. That what makes you faqih of the time, and that what earns you the title of shaheed. So going back to the story of Allama Hilli, I don't want to leave anything ambiguous in the minds of anyone. What he did was a very simple story. That when he walked in, obviously, no matter whatever he would have said, people would have, gotten into discussion with him. He walked in and he saw the place was packed. The seat next to Sultan Khudabande was empty. He picked up his shoes, put into his armpit, and he walked next to the Sultan and he sat down. Everybody started giggling, laughing, saying, look, this is how the ulama of Shia are. That they don't have adab of mahfil. You come to a mahfil of Sultan, you don't bring your shoes with you. You leave the shoes out there. And who told you to come and sit over here? You go ahead and sit somewhere else. He said, as far as sitting there is concerned, I didn't find any other place empty. I found this place to be empty, so I went ahead and sit. And if Sultan does not have any problem, then you shouldn't have either. Secondly, the reason I put the shoes in my armpit, because I was told that there are followers of Imam Abu Hanifa over here. And Imam Abu Hanifa had stolen the shoes of Rasulullah. Now we're having a discussion, so I don't want you to, giggle or laugh about it. We're having a, scholarly discussion, which is mentioned in the books of history, and it is documented. There's no need to do any tamaskhur. We're not trying to degrade anyone. He said, I heard that Imam Abu Hanifa had stolen the shoes of Rasulullah, and that's the reason. People right away said to him, how illiterate are you? Imam Abu Hanifa was born in the year 80 after Hijrah. That is 70 years after the wafat of Rasulullah. So they were not in the same time. Kind of like the story that I had narrated yesterday, Abu Rayhan Bayruni and Mullah Sadra. When they were 600 years apart, they could not have been together. But I rectified that. Second, he said, okay, if it's not Imam Abu Hanifa, then I'm sure that it was Imam Malik who stole the shoes of Rasulullah. Once again, people said, Imam Malik was born in the year 93, 13 years after. That is even further down. What are you talking about? Then he said, then it has to be Imam Shafi'i. He said he was born 150 years later. Then he said it has to be Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He said you have lost it because Ahmad ibn Hanbal was born 200 years after. He said, so you're telling me that the four Imams that you follow over here, the first one came 70 years after Prophet, second one came 80 years after Prophet, third one came 150 years after Prophet, fourth one came 200 years after Prophet. Now understand your fiqh and the ma'khadh and the mamba and the source of your fiqh. He said, who do you follow? He said, I follow the source, which was Nafs Rasulullah, the one who Prophet called to be his own Nafs, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqeen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wasalam. So here you understand the immense knowledge. As soon as he said that, the whole Jamaat over there, which had prayed their Salat al-Dhuhr according to the fiqh of Ahl Sunnah, when they prayed their Salat al-Asr, they prayed according to the fiqh of Ahl Tashayyu. That is the impact our ulama have. So don't undermine the work of those prominent ulama who have done. My topic tonight, was to talk about the concept of fasting on the day of Ashur. Obviously, I've taken too much time into building up the concept of fiqh that I won't be able to do justice towards this topic. Inshallah, we'll leave it for another time. And inshallah, at another place, or same place, another time, inshallah, maybe in this time, or maybe if I get an opportunity to come here again. But from here, we understand the importance of following the fiqh and following the legacy of these ulama. And that is the reason that when our imam was leaving, his son as our 11th imam, when he was leaving this world, he narrated a hadith. He narrated a hadith because a lot of time people today ask, why do we follow these mujtahideen? Where does the word ijtihad come from? Where does the word fiqh or faqih come from? We touched upon it one of the earlier nights and gave those logical examples that similarly how you follow people of that expertise in the life-related issues. And those sound like a broken record, those same examples of how you go to a doctor and a physician when you are sick, how you hire a lawyer when you need to defend something legal, how you get someone from the construction or the engineer to build a house. You imitate people and from their expert advice. Why not when it comes to religion? What is the source and where do we get this? The word ijtihad. Where do we get the word taqleed? Where do we get the word faqih? Refer to ayat of Surah Tawbah, verse number 122, in which I'll recite the translation of it so that I don't make the mistake in reciting the ayah. It says, why not some of you? Ta'ifatum minhum. Some people from your community go and study ulum ad-din, liyatafaqahu fi ad-din. The ayah says, liyatafaqahu fi ad-din. Yatafaqahu comes from faqih, fiqh, right? That's where we derive that word. Do tafaqquh in religion, and then come back to your people, and then guide them. Kind of like the standard that we have. Ulama go to they go to Najaf, and they're not ulama when they go, they study, they become ulama, they come back, and they do this propagation. So Surah Tawbah, verse number 122. That's your reference. In hadith, we find from our 11th imam who said, Amma man kana min al-fuqaha'i. He said, obviously, when imam goes into occultation, you will have to rely on fuqaha, those who are well versed in ulum ad-din. But he gave a standard of those people whom you should emulate. He said, فَأَمَّا مَنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْفُقَهَاءِ صائنا لنفسه حافظا لدينه مخالفا لهواه ومطيعا لأمر مولاه فللعوام أن يقلدوه. You see, all of those words are now present in it. The word taqleed, the word tafaqquh fiqh, the word mujtahid, the word fuqaha. Amma man kana min al-fuqaha. He said fuqaha are those. Sa'inan li nafsihi. The word sa'in comes from masoon, which means to procure, to protect, in other words. Sa'inan li nafsihi. They protect or they keep their nafs from being corrupted. وَحَافِظًا لِدِينِهِ. They are the backbone and the protectors of the religion. مُخَالِفًا لِهَوَى. They act against their desires. وَمُطِيعًا لِأَمْرِ مَوْلَى. And they are obedient towards the amr and the command of their Mawla. If you find these conditions, aside from knowledge obviously, knowledge has to be there. فَلِلْعَوَامِ أَن يُقَلِّدُوهُ. It is incumbent upon you to go ahead and do what? Taqleed of this person. And then Imam, hadith continues, there will not be too many of such people. There will be only a handful. And that is the case. Today we don't have, thousands and thousands of fuqaha that we have to emulate. You can count them on your hand. I can count literally on my hand all of those who are famous fuqaha of our time. And so it is incumbent upon us to go ahead and follow them. This is the nas, one from ayat of Quran, Surah Tawbah 122. Second is the hadith, a prominent hadith from our 11th Imam. He's setting this standard before the occultation of his son. Because his son will not have that time to go ahead and tell this to the followers. He will go into this occultation when he's only 5 years old. During those year 260 up until 329, those 69 years of minor occultation, Imam will have these direct naib, those nawab arba. They will be in touch with people appointed by Imam himself. But when Imam goes into major occultation in the year 329, then he says you follow this standard. فَأَمَّا مَنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْفُقَهَا. At that time, it was ijtihad was given to these 4 nawab, which was what? Which was khususi. But after Imam, his ghaibat al-kubra, it is umumi. But you have to look for this criteria in the scholars, and you go ahead and emulate them. This is how this religion has reached us, brothers and sisters. If it wasn't for this tireless work of some of the scholars, such as I named Allama Hilli, how he was able to convert the whole gathering with one ilmi and educational debate, how he was able to convert all of those people. How Shaheed Awwal, with his blood, was able to bring this, infuse this, spirituality into the books that we study. These books that we study, our spirituality is living in these books as well. And how Shaheed Thani then was able to decrypt these words of Shaheed Awwal so that you and I can benefit from it. And then how Shaheed Thalith was able to go ahead and make this to be a place where the name of Tashayyu was on top. So this is the, just the gist of how ulama had struggled throughout their life to get this ilm to us. All we got to do is pick up this book of Risalatul Amaliyah and follow what they have said. Nothing could be easier than that. And we gave example. This is not blind following. You still have to do your research when it comes to usul-e-din. It's only furu-e-din when you go ahead and follow these ulama. And if there is, differences in opinion of these fuqaha, don't call this to be, how come our fuqaha cannot agree on one single thing? And I said the other day, it's the biggest dalil and proof that they are not masoom. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So you realize that this deen has come to us with much, much difficulty. Initially, it was the blood of Shuhada Karbala that infused that spirituality and did not let the hard work of Rasulullah go to waste. 23 years of hard work of Rasulullah that ayat of Quran comes and says, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. That today this deen is complete. But what happens? Right after the wafat of Rasulullah, in only a matter of 50 years, we see the downfall of the religion. To the extent that people don't care about the grandson of Rasulullah. That it becomes so easy for them to abandon the grandson of Rasulullah, not accompany him. Why should we blame the Kufans? At least the people of Kufa had the guts and courage to write to Imam. How come the people of other places did not invite Imam alayhi salatu wassalam? Why don't you question the people of Medina did not accompany Imam alayhi salatu wassalam? Were there not Muslimin in the city of Makkah to accompany Imam alayhi salatu wassalam? Why should we blame the people of Kufa only? Although they do deserve the blame, but that's at least those people had the courage and guts to go ahead and invite Imam alayhi salatu wassalam. At least other people did not invite. That's another story that the people backed away and betrayed Imam. But nonetheless, this religion did not come to us that easily. You know, when Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen was demanded of allegiance, Janab Sayyida stood up to defend him. After the door was broken and Ali was dragged from his house to the court, and the first Khalifa was asking and demanding allegiance, you know who stood up for Amir al-Mu'mineen? Janab Sayyida. And you know what she did? She said, if you don't, khallu yabna am. She said, let go of my cousin. She did not say, let go of my husband. And if you don't, I will reveal my hair. That's all she threatened them with. If you don't let go of him, I'll reveal my hair. Imam said to Salman, oh Salman, take Fatima back. Ask the ladies to take Fatima back, because I see a storm is coming and it's going to destroy the city of Medina. And we don't want that to happen. Janab Sayyida only threatened to remove her hair. Nobody had the guts to ask for allegiance for the next 50 years. Janab Zainab had to remove, or was forced to remove, her veil. Ta qayamat, no one has the ability to seek allegiance and ask for allegiance. That is the difference between the two. So this religion has not come to us without sacrifices. Much sacrifice has been given. So let's not take it for granted. Let's not just get busy in the ritual part of the religion and forget the essence of it. Imam Zain al-Abidin was saying repeatedly that if it takes Hussein to be killed, but Deen to survive, then Hussein is Qurban on this religion. If it takes the hands of Abul Fadl Abbas and Deen survives, then may it be. If it takes the veils of Zainab and Kulthum, but the Deen survives, then let it be. Ajrukum Allah. Tonight, we will be reciting the Masaib of that Jawan, that Shabab, that youth by the name of Ali Akbar. You know, I remember one of the great scholars of our time, Marhum Mirza Athar, he used to recite his Masaib like this. And I have heard it personally myself. He used to begin the Masaib of Hazrat Ali Akbar by saying that if you recite the Masaib of Ali Akbar on the night of Muharram, your heart, no one will remain from shedding the tear, because that's how severe and difficult of Masaib, because he's a young son of Imam Hussein. But at the same time, when you recite the Masaib of Ali Akbar on the 9th or on the 8th, he says, it is complete comfort and solace for a father who has lost his son. You see the two effects of the Masaib of Ali Akbar? One effect of the Masibat of Ali Akbar is that your heart will burst into tears. The second effect of it is, if a father has lost his son, he will feel comfort. And that, I guess, goes for all the Masaib that we have. Who is this Ali Akbar? Ali Akbar is son of Imam Hussein. On the battlefield of Karbala, I mentioned it earlier as well, the first one from Banu Hashim, some riwayat mention, who asked Imam for permission to go to Maqtal, Imam who was hesitating to give permission to other people, Imam did not hesitate one bit as far as the permission is concerned. And here also you understand the psychology, before I get into the actual Masaib, the psychology of Karbala. That when Al Muhammad died, Zainab did not cry. Zainab did not shed a tear. It's only natural for one to shed a tear for her children. She only shed tears when she came back home to Medina. She kept seeing the heads of her sons throughout the journey, within into Sham, but she did not shed any tears for them. She only kept on shedding tears for Hussein. But when Ali Akbar was killed, Janab Zainab cried and wept so hard and severely that everybody's attention was grabbed. What happened to Zainab? Yes, Zainab had brought up Ali Akbar, so they could understand the attachment. But there was another thing Zainab was doing at that point. Zainab, by weeping in such a way, grabbed the attention of everyone, so they were focused on Zainab. When she was able to grab their attention, Hussein was able to not focus so much on the shahadat of his young son. You know how difficult it is to lose a young son, so that she could divert the attention of Imam Hussein. So he's not focused on that, so he'll cry. Instead, he will be focused on me. That's the psychology in Karbala that we find. Ali Akbar comes to Imam, says, "Oh Baba, do I have the permission?" Imam said, "Taqaddam waladi," yes, you have the permission, but before you go, bid farewell to the ladies. You owe them. They have nurtured you, raised you. Make sure that you bid farewell to them. Ali Akbar comes towards the tent. He comes and bids farewell to one lady at a time, but then they all gather in the same tent all together, because everybody had share in raising Ali Akbar. Probably Zainab had the biggest share, aside from Layla, in raising Ali Akbar. They were all looking at Ali Akbar. They had a halaqah around him, so they can all look at Ali Akbar from all different angles. You know how you look at someone that you will never be able to look at again. And why not? Because Imam, when Ali Akbar was leaving, said what? He said, Allahumma, O Allah, be witness, baraza ilayhim ghulamun ashbahun nas khalqan wa khulqan wa mantiqan bi rasulik. O Allah, be witness, the ghulam, the one who's going towards Maqtal, towards these people, is the one who's the closest when it comes to khalq, his creation, when it comes to akhlaq and khulq, when it comes to speech, to your Rasulullah. And whenever we wanted to look at Rasulullah, we will look at the face of Ali Akbar. Ajrakum Allah. May Allah give you no grief and sorrow except the grief of Ahlul Bayt. Why won't they stare at Ali Akbar in such a fashion? Ravi says that I saw the curtain lift a few times. Ali Akbar wanted to come out, but he was pulled back in. He said it happened a couple of times, but someone was pulling him from his shoulder. But last time I saw someone pull him from his shirt. I said, who could that be? Then I realized that could be his sister, young Sakina, who was pulling him. Ali Akbar says, what is wrong with you ladies? My father is calling for help and you won't let me go. Ali Akbar eventually makes his way out of the tent, comes to Mawla, bidding farewell. Imam prepares him how you would prepare someone to go towards Maqtal, sits him on the horse and asks him for one request. He said, oh my son, as you are making your way toward the Maqtal, please keep on looking back. Ali Akbar wants to move. As soon as he gets onto his horse and he wants to start the journey to go towards Maqtal, to fight for his father, to fight for this religion, he sees one scene. He feels that someone is walking behind him. He turns around to only find his old father, Hussein ibn Ali, is stumbling after him. Ajrakum Allah. May Allah give you no grief except the grief and sorrow of Ahlul Bayt. He said, "Oh Baba, have you not bid farewell to me? Now why are you coming behind me?" Imam said a sentence. I don't know if you have the courage to listen. Imam said, "Oh Ali Akbar, if you were Sahib Aulad, oh Ali Akbar, if you had your own children, then you would not ask me this question." Ali Akbar bids farewell to Imam. He makes his way towards Maqtal. He introduces himself. Ana Ali Akbar. I'm the son of Hussein. I've been trained under Abbas. I am the grandson of Haidar Karrar. And Ali Akbar shows this courage, his valor, his bravery, shows his skills as far as the fighting is concerned. There are numerous numbers that is mentioned that Ali Akbar killed in the first attack that he had made, but he had also been thirsty for 3 days. He comes back to the tents. He comes back to his father. Imagine the heat of the day. Imagine the zira, the shield that he was wearing, bearing down on him, the weight of it. He comes back to his father and he said, "Ya Babati, is there any sip of water that you can provide?" Imam replied by saying, "Oh Ali Akbar, what a question that a father is unable to fulfill. All you're asking for a sip of water, but unfortunately your father cannot fulfill it. If you want, you can suck on my tongue if that could help any." He tries, but he pulls back, saying, "What, oh Baba, your tongue is even drier than mine." Ajrukum Allah. Imam said, "Oh Ali Akbar, soon you will be quenched, your thirst will be quenched by the Hawd Kauthar. Go back to battlefield and just take my ring and put it in your mouth if it gives you any comfort." Ali Akbar comes back to the Maqtal, performs one last jihad. After enemy had attacked Ali Akbar from all different places, they attacked him. And then a person got on top of Ali Akbar and put a dagger into his heart. When he did that, he called upon his father, not asking for nusrat, not asking for help. All he said, "Assalamu alayka ya Abbas." "Oh my father, salam to you." Imam heard that. He makes his way to the Maqtal, stumbling, an old father, saying, "Oh Ali Akbar, there's no fun in this life anymore. There's no sweetness in this life anymore. After you, this life has no worth." Ajrukum Allah. I've heard from some ulama, they recite the Maqtal of Ali Akbar like this, that Imam reaches Ali Akbar, picks up his head, puts him on his lap, and Imam wants to pull the dagger out of his heart. You know, when a dagger goes in, it causes pain, but when you pull it out, it is causing further pain. But it takes courage for someone to pull it out. It is possible that Imam Hussein might have looked towards Najaf. "Ya Baba, oh Ali ibn Abi Talib, oh my father, lifting the gate of Khaybar was easy. Pulling the dagger from the heart of your son is hard."